move on to the next part here, a topic I know so many of you are so interested in. Let's put this please up there on the screen. An indication at the very basic level, and a lot of what we'll actually talk about today, about economic feeling and others, is housing. And the housing market right now is just the worst of all worlds. You have high prices and high interest rates. You have also a feeling for a lot of people of being trapped because home sales have now fallen to a 13-year low in October, the lowest, since 2011. And from these economic forecasts, what you're seeing is that while there has been a slight dip in price, high rates have predominantly had the effect not of pushing down prices, but instead of locking homeowners in to where they currently are and refusing to move. This has a lot of issues. One, if you are in the entry of the housing market, there's probably never been a worse time to try and buy a house with a high interest rate and with a high price. Two, so you decide to rent a couple more years than you would have in the past if you had the down payment and the ability to buy. Well, what does that do? That causes rent inflation to continue to go up. And lo and behold, every single time you look at the CPI, rent and housing inflation remains one of the top drivers of the overall consumer price index. So the housing, crunch, both at a price level in terms of the inability to sell, and then the massive pressure on the rental market, combined with, if you're a developer right now, why are we building a house exactly if I can't sell it? And if I, have to pay 8% interest on my construction loan? So you have a supply crunch, a rent crunch, and a housing crunch, all wrapped in to the same time. I honestly think this is like on par with this 1970s, level stagflation, where at that point it was unemployment that was getting all the attention. But here, housing just floats under the rug. People just don't talk about it as much. And yet we have seen a tremendous amount of audience interest because I think this is probably at the top of so many of your heads, especially if you're younger. For a lot of the boomers, they've got what they need. But, and I guess that's why cable news and others would ignore it. And if you're rich, none of this really applies to you. But if you are even upper middle class or lower, you're having a tough time out there right now trying to buy a house, especially with average home price in a major metro area has crossed $500,000.
I'll never forget that poll that we looked at that was like people were praying for a housing crash because they were like, how else am I ever going to afford a house? And instead, you've had the worst of all worlds. Mortgage rates have gone way up and housing prices have still gone up. And so, the market is just completely frozen. Rents are still wildly expensive, and people just feel like, I will never be able to make it. This will never be sustainable. I will never be able to be in like a stable position as a homeowner building something. And that's why I put this next piece up on the screen. You have so many people saying in a new Wall Street Journal poll that the American dream is dead. It's slipping out of reach. Fewer people believe that anyone who works hard can get ahead. Only 36% of voters in this poll say that the American dream still holds true. That is way fewer than the 53% majority who said that just back in 2012 and the 48% who said it back in 2016 in similar surveys asked by a different pollster. There was also a Wall Street Journal poll last year that asked whether people who work hard were likely to get ahead, and some 68% actually said yes, nearly twice the share as in this American Dream poll. Now, those are slightly different questions, but it shows you still there has been a deterioration even in the past year. The American Dream, they say, seemed most remote to young adults and women. Some 46% of men were actually like, okay, American Dream's still real. Only 28% of women said the ideal of advancement for hard work still holds true, as did 48% of voters age 65 or older, but only 28% of those under age 50. And I would be curious to see, under age 30, what are those numbers? I bet it's even lower than 28% who feel like the American dream is still even a possibility.
Yeah, so to have it just flip completely in the span of not even a single generation, but really in a decade is one of the more profound economic stories of all American history. There have been very few as transformative times as we're in right now. This is on par with the Great, and really I think an extension of the Great Recession and the attendant social fallout. We had the Great Depression, which is really the only other previous time in modern industrial society that we've seen anything like this. And we instead don't, we try to pretend, and we live with the day to day. And of course, we're talking about Israel and OpenAI and Ireland and all this other stuff. But this is by and large the single biggest determinant of how you're going to live your life, how you're going to get a job, whether you're able to get married, what it actually looks like, what your prospects are to the future, if you have and want to even work to anything in the future, or like why you would even choose to go into debt to get some schooling. You only do that if you think that you're going to come out better on the other side. And the same holds true for really any investment that you're going to make. So nihilism has a really downstream, terrible impact economically, and then of course on a personal and life level. It's just it's an awful way to live. And the way that comes out in politics is the primal screams. You have Trump, you have Bernie, you have all these like flash in the pan moments. The establishment panics, it tries to co-opt and all of that. But I think at this point, they have failed so dramatically to grapple all the way from 2001 onward that they don't deserve a single ounce of trust anymore. And it's really a generational gap between people who are our age, Krystal, and the people who are 25, 30 years older, who can remember the 1990s, who were adults at that time, and who were living large. Whereas for the rest of us, that's a distant memory. It's like something that exists in the past. I've been rewatching Friends recently. It is an amazing, it's like a time capsule. And I think one of the reasons why people love the show so much is, man, what an awesome time. 1998, they had cell phones. The stock market was going like 20, they know 9/11, and just like the carefree like nature in which you could just watch six people screw off at a coffee shop. It really does show you what America was like at that time, as opposed to what's popular now for most people.
I mean, it wasn't exactly an accurate depiction.
Why did it hit? I got you. Why did it hit to the core?
Well, and not only did
of the
it
zeitgeist
then, but it still
the nostalgia
hit.
Now. Yes,
my 15-year-old watched the whole thing and was obsessed with it and whatever. Right. On the American Dream piece, there's a great book that I've mentioned on the show before, and we've actually had the author, Justin Guest, on the show as well, called The New Minority. And it's a look at the white working class. And part of one of the sections, it's actually a comparison of the white working class in the U.S., in Youngstown, Ohio, and the white working class in a working class suburb of London. And they actually found that in some ways the belief in the American dream was kind of insidious. And the reason why is because if you have this pervading mythology of like, if you work hard, you can make it, and it's all about you, right? Your individual work ethic and agency and all of that, then it leads people to blame themselves when, like that nurse that we played earlier, when they're going through it and they're struggling. And I mean, she says something, she's like, I did everything right. Like, I did everything right. And there's all this shame wrapped up in it. And what he found through, like a statistical analysis, is that belief, that persistent belief in the American dream actually undercut activism because it led people more to look inward and be like, I must be doing something wrong. I must be a failure. And anyone can look at their life and find like, oh, I shouldn't have bought that, or I shouldn't have made that decision, or maybe I'm doing this wrong, or maybe I'm doing that wrong. Everybody can do that, right? But it led them to focus inward rather than engaging in collective action to actually change government policy, which I thought was a really interesting insight. So with regards to the American dream, something I've been thinking about, we've actually had the author of this book, The New Minority, on this show, which looks at the white working class. And he did an analysis comparing the white working class in Youngstown and the white working class in a suburb of London. And one thing that he found is that the idea of the American dream is actually, in a sense, kind of insidious. Because if the idea is, if you work hard, you can make it, then if you don't make it, the natural instinct is to say, well, I must have done something wrong. And so in a sense, Saagar, it sort of short circuits the type of collective action that could push the government to make different policy decisions. So on the one hand, while of course it's bad that people feel like they can't make it and the American dream is dead, I'm actually for establishing some new mythology that's not all about like, if you don't make it, it's your fault. You should feel shame. You should feel horrible. You should examine everywhere that you went wrong in your life. And instead looks at not only personal agency, we can still hold open some piece of personal agency, but also looks at the manifest ways that elites and our government have completely failed the American people over decades.
Yeah, I think the story of the U.S., just to tie a bow on it, is a battle between rugged individualism and then labor capitalism. And so the transition of the expansion west, and it's like the California gold rush. You can go out there, you can make it on your own. Oops, a bunch of people go bust, and then we have like financialization, and we have mass industrialization, and you have, if anybody ever watched the TV show, one of my favorite shows, The Gilded Age, the current season is actually really working through some of this, where you have these titans of like robber baron type capitalism, but you also have union officials that are emerging in a movement at the same time. And there's a scene where one of the guys tries to buy one of the union leaders off, and he's like, "You don't really get what's going on here, do you?" And whenever he goes back, and then that struggle is really the story of the modern industrial economy. It played out here, it played out all across Europe, and the way that U.S. and Britain really separated themselves from Germany and from Russia and others that went in a much more communist direction is that their elites recognized that you have to treat and pay people better and enshrine their rights into law. And they basically acquiesced, whereas the Russian and the German monarchies were like, yeah, we're not doing basically any of that. And what happened to their societies collapsed, broke down, and they had massive revolutions. So if we don't want to repeat the mistakes that they made, we have to do what really, I think, saved capitalism in a lot of ways, which is what FDR and his predecessors did, is recognize those rights and incorporate it both into the rugged American story, as well as recognizing that structural factors are, of course, going to impact, everyday people's lives. And so, anyway, I think the reason that we are currently in the scenario that we are is that we've swung much more back in that direction and have really forgotten, I think, a cherished part of our history, which has been missing now for a long time.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.